if I may say, the first presentation for Professor Mikkel, it was not so inspiring, it was more obliging. And I hope that we will make good results in accordance with his expectations.
When I think about the potential accession of Western Balkan countries, so primarily I think about Serbia, Montenegro, Macedonia, Albania, and Bosnia and Herzegovina. I compare these countries with Spain and Portugal, who became member states of the European Union in 86. Because I would say that the background of all these countries is similar. Although, in my opinion, the background of Spain and Portugal was much less advantageous compared to our countries, taking into account the real dictatorship that existed in these two countries for decades. Also civil war, very bloody civil war in Spain, and then later, after the democracy came, the attempt of coup d'etat. And with that not really advantageous background, these two countries became member states after 1 decade, but after almost 10 years. They became the member states of the European Union. While our countries, I mean Western Balkan countries, are negotiating for 20 years, for 2 decades. Is it possible that the problem now is not inside of our countries, in the sense of the reforms that these countries are performing, but let's say, guilt pertains more to the European Union or to the European institutions, and that maybe whatever we do in the sense of reforms will not be enough to become member states? Like, I would like to know your opinion about it, maybe primarily to Professor Vladan Petrov, but it refers to everyone.
I thought that I tried to answer to your question. I tried to answer. I tried already in my presentation, but maybe you will find my point of view when you maybe read the whole article. I am not the person who is ready to see the things or the processes from the point of sole responsibility of one side. From one point of view, Serbia, for example, but also the other countries of the Western Balkans stay into the line for the European integration in a specific moment or in a specific period of time when the EU was not that EU, which was very in favor of the enlargement. And that is the fact. A lot of crises, internal and external, especially when the Ukraine war begins, makes the situation more complex. And I cannot say that EU is guilty because, or responsible because it is trying to maybe to learn us, if I can say Serbia, not to mention other countries, to learn us to make some continual efforts, because our mentality problem is continuity in doing something. So I can find a lot of gaps from our side in that process of integration in the sense of the continuity. I cannot say and I cannot talk about the sincereness of that process from our side. But objectively, we could have done more in these 10 years. We could have done more. The other question is if it would be enough to be more close to the European Union, and the another question is, it is really important to us at this complex moment of geopolitical restructuring of the world. So there are a lot of, or plenty of factors which could be concluding in finding not the right, but the one of the possible solution. But in summary, I could say that Serbia could do more. The EU could concentrate on itself and its huge problems and to find the proper way for the integration or enlargement of the other countries, especially, I think, not the group of countries. I am more in favor of individual or gradual integration than group integration as a whole. And thirdly, I think that we have to wait a little bit, not a lot, but maybe 2 or 3 days to see what will happen in the world globally. We are definitely, unfortunately, in front of the big problems in the world. Maybe, unfortunately, in front of the global war. So all those answers should be, in a way, should be not postponed, but the mean of this kind of project is for us to learn more, to analyze, and to prepare for the future. But I really don't know when the future in relations to Serbia and EU will really come. Thank you.
If I may add just a small thought. Of course, you are much greater experts on Western Balkans than I am. But just a general remark. I'm afraid that at the end of the day, the decision to enlarge the EU is not a legal but a political one. And you know, if you want to, you can do it. Cyprus was adopted without having clear borders, and still not having them. Romania, Bulgaria haven't, so to speak, finished their homework and still accepted under the monitoring procedure. So if there is a political will, it can be done, and I believe that the momentum is now changing in the world of today. So maybe the situation will be more similar to Hispanic Peninsula than it used to be over the last decade.
Okay, so I just wanted to say that I really liked something that was pointed out, I think, by Professor Michal, but also Professor Petrov said pretty much the same thing. When thinking about the EU enlargement dilemmas, on one hand, we have the enlargement of member states. On the other hand, on the opposite hand, we have the need for the EU to reform itself. Now, we know that the accession of member states, they have to reform. This is a very strict process. It is a scrutinized process. However, on the other hand, one must ask a question: is the EU ready for this? Is it really ready? Is it really willing to reform in a way that will be able to accommodate all of the new members? Because this is a challenge that it was never encountered with the European Union before. So there are huge questions on both sides. If we look member states as one side, of course, these are different sides. So this is a hugely problematic issue. Thank you. Just
at the moment, Professor Petrov, in your presentation, sorry, you prompted an important question about the identity of the EU. What is the European Union? And I would like to ask, do you think that answering this question is a prerequisite for a successful enlargement? And who should define the identity of the European Union? What is your opinion?
If we agree that the decision for the next enlargement is a rather political one, then the identity question is not the prerequisite. But I am definitely sure that if the EU wants one time to be a real political community, it should try to define its political and political-cultural identity. I think that it is important. And you know my answer, because I said, especially here several times, that I don't think that defining that unique political identity should erase the national identities. I am one of those who thinks that it should, it is possible to find some way of harmonization, or maybe it is possible to try to do this. If we are not trying, I think that it is in final solution, unfortunately, the end of the EU. Because if the EU once upon a time was an idea or ideal of united Europe, then this unification should be a kind of political unification which should not erase or nullify the national identities, or on the contrary, I think.
If I may notice, Professor Petrov opinion about this political identity, it is really easy from his perspective because he is outside of Europe.
Thank you. I would like to ask again Professor Petrov. He, as a lawyer, used legal arguments. He referred to Serbian constitution that should be changed, referring to relations to Kosovo. Unless we found out that it is a political decision, a political process. But still, talking about the argument of the constitution, I have to point out here that Slovenia has changed the constitution twice to accomplish or to fulfill the conditions required by acquis communautaire. And the second amendment of the constitution was that a part of sovereignty of the country should be transferred to European institutions. Not the sovereignty, but the execution of the sovereignty rights. It is a huge decision, very relevant to autonomy of a nation. But still, close to 90% referendum support was to this amendment of the constitution. Do you think that referring to constitutional arguments are enough? And let me ask you, I didn't quite understand your idea on political identity. Can you explain more what do you mean by political identity of the European Union? Yes.
Thank you. In relation to the first question, not to be offensive, I think that the comparison between Slovenia and Serbia in EU integration is absolutely not possible. Because I stressed that EU integration of Serbia is really a sui generis process, because there is no other member state candidates which has to deal with that kind of political, highly political and very, very delicate identically delicate question, to not only to read from the whole sovereignty of the part of the territory, but also to retreat from something which is its national, political, and national in whole identity. Kosovo is not a territory for Serbia. Kosovo is the question of our identity. And it is not definitely an easy decision. I am prepared in the future to discuss with other colleagues, not constitutional lawyers also, because constitutional or lawyers comes, if I, not to offend the constitutional lawyers, but they come at the end, when the political problems or questions are in a way settled down, to finalize, to find the constitutional way or constitutional form of this previously politically solved question. So that is the question on your first, of course. So in other words, we don't have a problem to change the constitution as many times as it is possible to become the member states of the EU. But concerning the Kosovo's question, it is far more difficult. It is not the question of solely constitutional amendment process. And the second one, you know, that word identity, and all of us, especially constitutional lawyers, know that constitutional identity is a concept which is very interesting, intriguing, and very vague, but very dominant in the previous period and probably in the future. And it is difficult to say if the political identity is something more or higher or different in comparison with constitutional identity. But I will don't talk about this. I will say just that I am not, maybe from the perspective of the lawyer who is not from the member state of the EU, that I don't feel that I understand what are those unique or substantially different principles and values which forms this political identity of the EU. So I don't think that it exists at this period of time. I think that it has to be construed if the EU wants to be a really independent and autonomous factor in geopolitical relations. Because if we compare with people, with a person, if you don't have an identity, you miss the chances, you're confused, you don't have the strategy, all your reforms are superficial. So, in a way, I think that the EU have to change substantially and to find some, maybe, the spots which could really connect all the member states with its values. And I'm not sure that those are just very familiar to all of us. Rule of law, separation of power, responsibility, and et cetera, et cetera. So I probably didn't give you the answer because I don't know the answer, but I really think that political identity is something which has to be found for the entity which pretend to be politically autonomous and independent. If it is not possible, then the future of the EU is very, very disputable, in my opinion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I will be really short. I just want to point out that in the question of Kosovo, because that is the main issue here, obviously, the international law is at stake, not only the municipal law of Serbia. According to international law, all those, for example, Resolution 1244 of UN Security Council, Badenter Commission report from 1991, the Yugoslavia broke up according to republic borders. So we here in this situation, we are just implementing international law. So if Professor Petrov emphasized Serbian constitutional law, of course, this situation is problematic according to in relation to Serbian constitutional law, but it is also problematic in relation to international law. So also, I would like to emphasize that some other European Union countries, for example, Spain, Slovakia, Romania, have not recognized Kosovo independence. So it's a bit strange that EU has like one-side approach towards this question, normalization of relations with Kosovo, Serbia and Kosovo, and on the other hand, not even all member states of the EU have not recognized the independence of so-called Kosovo. Thank you. Wants to take the microphone?
Yes, I would just like to add that actually it's a question for Professor Petrov. Do you think, yeah, very interesting topic, I think, especially for us from the Balkans. I would just want to ask you, do you think that now with the situation between Serbia and Kosovo, that we can see that maybe similar situation was happening during the dissolution of Yugoslavia, which increased some kind of instability between not only those countries involved, but only in the whole region? And do you think that if Serbia doesn't want to change their constitution regarding the integrity and sovereignty of their territory, do you think it's even possible for Serbia to enter the European Union, considering that would endanger the whole cooperation between the member states of the European Union, which is the main goal of the Union? Thank you.
I tried to write it down, but I couldn't make it. Just one reference to Alexa. In my article, there is several paragraphs about this very important international legal factor or legal position of Serbia. We are trying to be very consistent, and I don't think that we will give up from our position anytime in the future. Even maybe, and that is the part of answer to you, even maybe if we will decide to change the constitution in order to find some more adequate formulation for the future relationship between Kosovo and Serbia. To find some constitutionally abnormal, constitutionally, if I can say, original formula of the phrase normalization of relations between Kosovo and Serbia. Maybe it is something which should be, or where we can try to find some answer to that question if we go back to the Constitution of 1974, because that Constitution, as you know, gave to autonomous provinces the quasi-state position. Almost some elements of, not constitutional, but in practice, of the position of the international subjectivity. Who knows? But if we are comparing the situation in Yugoslavia and this situation, I think in a way that this is the finalization of that process of integration, but it is a rather simplification to equivote, to say that it is the same process, because Yugoslavia was something totally different. And Serbia, as I said, is something different. So it is not the same. It is not the same, I think, but I think that we should try to stop those processes of disintegration on the Balkans, because I really believe that they can have a negative effect not only on the countries on the Western Balkans, but also for the EU if the Western Balkans enter into the EU. And finally, if I adequately understand, I don't think that we have or we should find the solution which will be totally unacceptable for our national point of view. So national interest is the most important. Not national in a sense of nationality, but in the sense of state position and role. I'm really sure that Serbia has some advantages in comparison with other states of the Western Balkans, even in comparison with some states of the EU, because of that politics which has now. That politics is rather sensible, reasonable, and it is very open to the four sides of the world. Maybe it will be at the end in a way not destructive but not positive as we expect at this moment, but it will be definitely not negative as it was in some past period of times when we were, for example, in the first period of the 19th century, we were said that we are the key factors of the finding solution of the Yugoslav crisis. And several years ago, we became a key problem to be solved. So I don't think that we are on the same line of politics today as we were at the beginning of 19th, and I'm very optimistic about our strategy of the future integration in whole, not only the European integration. Thank you.
Dear colleagues, the question of Kosovo in the context of enlargement has sparked a vivid discussion here, and I think it's very symptomatic. And let me remind you that territorial issues in the context of enlargement are not only in connection with Serbia, it is also inherent to the discussion on the enlargement process in connection, for example, also with Ukraine and Georgia. So it is a very topical issue, and in the Central European Academy we are very glad that we can host such scientific discussions during our conferences. And I suggest we continue these discussions during the lunch break, to which I invite you cordially. Before that, I would like to express our gratitude to our presenters from the first section. We appreciate very much your outstanding presentations. And also I would like to invite everyone for a family photo before the lunch. Thank you very much.
I have a question for Professor Bohins, if I may, who mentioned that according to the constitutional provisions which were introduced in Slovenia a few years ago, as I assume, sorry, but I do not know details, but the interesting thing for me is what it actually means, because you said something like a part of sovereignty is given to the EU. What does it mean, actually, a part? Because I can imagine that there are some rulings, court rulings, referring to this issue, but if you were so kind to explain us what it actually means, this part of sovereignty.
Thank you for this question. It is not explained in the constitutional text what kind of powers are transferred to European Union bodies. It is just a general provision, and it is not European Union who is mentioned in the Constitution. It is mentioned international organization which respects human rights and freedoms and so on and so on. So, and everybody see in this formulation European Union. So there is a constitutional ground that some of the powers which are the powers immanent to sovereignty nation would be transferred not as powers but as authorization for execution these powers on the level of European Union bodies. Obviously here we are talking about the powers that the European Union bodies have, like European Commission, which decides on some relevant issues like European Council. We know that there are mechanisms about consensus and so on, but there are also some majority. And now the discussion is going on about introducing some majority decisions. This is what is meant by this constitutional ground. Not exactly defined, but the window, it is opened for such. And the theoretical discussion went on if this is transfer of part of sovereignty or not. And the conclusion was it is not a part of sovereignty, but it's just the execution of these rights, the authorization for execution of some of this right, which means powers of the bodies. It was a huge discussion in the country, and at the end of the day, that was approved in the constitutional revision process.
Thank you. So I would like to make a short comment to the presentation of Professor Bohins and also presentation of György Marinkás. You mentioned, both of you mentioned the issue connected to the acquisition of real estate by non-nationals, and that how it became an issue during the accession process. It was also an issue in Poland as well. At that time, well, still that issue is regulated in a separate act on the acquisition of real estate by foreigners, and this act was adopted in 1920. So just after the First World War, after Poland had regained its independence after 123 years of literally non-existence on the map. So that act provided for the ban on the acquisition of real estate by non-Polish nationals. They needed to get a permission from the government. And that was a big issue also during the accession negotiations. That act had to be amended and was amended. But Poland received 10 or 12 years maybe of transition period in relation to the forests and agricultural lands. And that issue was then regulated in a separate act, which overall provides for a very complex framework. But still, I remember that it also in Poland was a huge issue. I don't remember if in Poland there was any tobacco paradox or Palinka case that would have been so important for, let's say, an average bread eater. Maybe Professor Pastuszko remembers better if there was something like that, but I don't think so. So that the acquisition of real estate by non-Polish nationals, that was also a big issue in Poland. Just a short comment.
It was not a question, it was more or less a comment, but let me still say, yes, in a negotiation process, the European Commission raised the issue of the right of the foreigners to buy the land in Slovenia, and that was at that time constitutionally forbidden. It was. You have to consider that our constitution was enacted in the context of independence of Slovenia. So that was the first constitution after independence, separation of former Yugoslavia. So it was there were some, revolutionary provisions in the constitution. And one of these was this. Not to allow foreigners. And the European Commission negotiators, they wanted to remove this from the Constitution and to enact a law permitting, that was discussion that lasts at least 2 years, because our side was afraid, not so much politicians, but the general population, they said, now that Italian will come and buy the land at the coast, and I don't know who else, the Croatian will come. So it was euphoric or politically colored discussion, and but still, our government at that time went to constitutional revision and give the constitutional ground for this law, and nothing happened. I mean, there were some purchases, there were some acquisitions, but it was not what was, people were afraid of. It was some, maybe tens or maybe hundreds of purchasing, nothing special, 100. Like the end was not, the world was not end with abolishing free trade shops at the borders. That was also a big discussion. From today's perspective, this is a small issue, very small.
Maybe a kind of comment from my side, a kind of, question to the head of the research group, that today we could enjoy the colleagues' presentation, typically focusing on their national approach, the national reports and so on. However, I think it was also an interesting aspect of this wave of accession connected to the Central European countries' accession to the European Union, that as far as I know, I'm not an expert of this enlargement issue, but I have a kind of, how can I say, memories about this, that originally they also planned some of the countries, the Visegrad countries, that to form a kind of collaboration during the negotiations. I think it was also an interesting initiative from their side. However, as far as I remember, finally we say that EU could separate them from each other, and separate and rule. There is a Latin word phrase, and maybe we can say it was not successful from the perspective of this new candidate. I think it's also interesting. I don't know whether in this present wave of the enlargement procedure there is any similar initiative from the side. I haven't heard it. Maybe they are not as unified in this sense, but I think it's also an interesting aspect of this previous enlargement. Sorry for maybe my comment was a little bit long, but if anybody has any questions, yeah, there is a colleague.
Do you have in your country some specific cases regarding national sovereignty which were decided by the Constitutional Court? I'm asking because in the Czech Republic we have few cases where Constitutional Court was deciding about sovereignty and transfer of competencies and try to explain what is the interaction between national law and European Union law, what are the limits and how philosophically it's working. It was a case, for example, regarding European arrest warrant or sugar quotas or assessment of the Lisbon Treaty and its compatibility with legal system. And in the development of Constitutional Court, there are very interesting ideas. For example, that European law is sunshining into the Czech legal system, or that we are not transferring but just lending sovereignty to EU level and sharing it. So do you have in your countries some similar decisions? Because it would be very interesting to compare these attitudes of Constitutional Court. Thank you.
I consider this question as a general question, and the addressee of this question, I think all of our presenters. Therefore, if I may, I transfer the mic to Professor Pastuszko first.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thanks for the question. Of course, in Poland, we have a variety of judgments concerning this issue. Professor Bochins made me aware that the clause which was introduced into the Slovenian constitution at the moment when you were a part of the European Union in Poland, we had such a clause earlier because it was enacted in 1997, and based on this clause there rose judgments of the Constitutional Tribunal which in the substance were quite close to judgments of the German Constitutional Court. I have an impression, and it's not only my impression, that Polish judges were following German Constitutional Court. And the consequence was that the Constitutional Court managed to create something like Polish constitutional identity, pointing out a couple of rules which are not to be amended, which are not to be changed. If you read these judgments, then you can see a delicate border which cannot be crossed by the European Union. However, we know that the Union is a developing organization, and what was said in 2005 and 2011, I'm talking here about the most important judgments, may not stay in force after years. So I'm not quite convinced that those judgments are the judgments that we can make use nowadays. For example, we have judgments issued by the Court of Justice of the European Union relating to Poland, in which the court said straight away that Polish constitution is under the European law, and these judgments are completely inconsistent with the Polish Constitutional Court said. If I may take advantage and refer to what Kasia Zombori said, because we had also such a case in Poland during accession period. I mean, there was big discussion on the ownership of lands in Poland. I mean, the right to buy lands and to be owners by foreigners in Poland. And it was being discussed for a long time during the accession process. Many Poles were concerned about letting foreigners buying lands, as the economic and financial dominance was perceived as something dangerous for the future of the country. And for all I remember, the negotiating sides managed to fix a term of 12 years. It was 12 years for foreigners to be permitted, to be allowed to buy lands. Now it's not a problem anymore. This problem stopped existing. There was another layer of the problem, because, you know, Poland consists partly of lands, of territories which were introduced to the country after the Second World War, and those were German territories. And the biggest concern was whether German citizens will not buy these lands, and therefore the talks were concentrated on this issue at a very high level, and the European Union and Warsaw were deeply engaged in the process of negotiations. I can remember, you know, many proposals laying on the table, many issues being talked. Finally, a compromise solution was found on the matter.
This is a good example that you have raised, the primacy of European law over national legislation, an example of transfer of competencies. And we had some, at early stage, some judicial cases in this concern, but maybe thanks to this constitutional ground that we have enacted, it is not so widespread in the country. It happens that there is a conflict of competence, but we could find some cases judicial. Yeah.
Thank you. So, thank you for the question. Before the accession, there was a decision of the Constitutional Court. It was number 30 of 1998, and in that decision, the Hungarian Constitutional Court said that until we access to the European Union, the EU law cannot be applied directly within the country because it is international law, and this decision was a source for drafting the so-called Europe Clause of the then Constitution, which stated that Hungary may exercise her powers common with the other member states. And after the accession, until 2016, the Hungarian Constitutional Court kept a low profile on EU law and the primacy of EU law, as Nora Kronowski named this system, was the so-called two-pronged system. And according to this system, the Hungarian Constitutional Court said that there is international law, that is one prong, and the European law is not a sui generis law, it is part of the domestic legal system, and therefore it cannot collide with the Hungarian constitution or internal law. And this lasted until 2016, when the Hungarian Constitutional Court first made a test based on the case law of the German Constitutional Court. So it was, as some critics says, it was copy-pasted from the German decisions without applying it to the specific Hungarian context, but maybe it followed the German Constitutional Court.
I would like to draw your attention that in the previous year, in the previous professors network, we have a research group, and they dealt with the constitutional identity. And I'm very glad that we already published this book. And in this group, the researchers, some of them, they are here. I think Michal Peter was also, Professor Bacic was also a member of that group. From Polish side, Professor Stemkowski, I think, and of course others. And they dealt with this question in the book. And I have to emphasize that, of course, we can give you a book from this series. Therefore, if you are ready to receive this one, in this case, of course, we are ready to give it. Any other questions? Yeah? A moment, a microphone. It's always important for us, and it is switched on.
I have a question for Professor Bohinc. Regarding the Slovenian acquisition, there were many challenges as well as changes, political, economic, as well as legal. And we had to comply with the already established EU regulations. So in connection to the Article 2 of the Treaty of the European Union that lists all the European values, or if I say values of the European EU member states, do you believe, just your opinion, that Slovenia internalized all of those values that were proposed in the Treaty of the European Union? Or are we still struggling with it?
I can't give here a negative answer. Of course, we have internalized these values. The European Union is based on values. As you said, it's Article 2, it's very high priority, and all the European building is grounded on European values. That doesn't mean that we don't have problems here and there, but in principle, yes, we follow European civilization based on these values. And that was something that was expected by Slovene population for decades. So European orientation towards Europe, not towards other parts of the world. And I think we don't have such big problems with respecting the values. But yes, there are confrontations of some political structures also related to respect. For instance, respecting constitutional judgments. This is something that's it's probably also in other states that are not fulfilled in time. But yes, in principle, I think our system and our life is based on European Union values. Don't you agree?
Yes, I do agree, but I think that there is still space for improvement.
Exactly.
I have a question for Professor Sansin. Thank you for a very clear and good presentation. However, you mentioned the transitional arrangements, potential transitional arrangements for freedom of movement of workers. That is something that I'm dealing with. And I'm just questioning if the transitional period for the freedom of movement of workers would be justified, because we already know, for example, on Ukraine, because we already know that a bunch of Ukrainian workers are already in the EU labor market. So I want to know, what is your opinion on it, if it's actually proportionate, justified, and necessary for the European Union? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for this excellent question. And this is why I said it's a curious element, let's say, of this negotiating framework, because at the moment it comes without any further specifications, and especially taking into account that there are a lot of Ukrainian nationals present on the territories of EU member states. It would be interesting to see how any limitations, let's say, on their rights to work freely in the European Union would be implemented, because that would be an additional challenge then. It's very hard to say for me now what exactly the EU Commission has in mind and how would they frame, let's say, this transitional period and conditions that would apply. I don't know, that is the honest answer, but I think that probably they will have to introduce, let's say, various categories of Ukrainian nationals to which this regime would apply, because those who are already on the territory of the EU member states with a valid permits to reside in these countries will probably not be subjected to any transitional periods. I mean, it's hard for me to imagine how this would be possible. And then, and this is why I find this provision very interesting and difficult to imagine how this would actually be monitored in practice. So let's see, I don't know yet, but we will follow up closely what regime the Commission comes up with. I have one question also for Eva, because very interesting presentation on these Beneš decrees and how then the Czech Republic or Czechia dealt with the issue in this accession process. But there have been, of course, complaints brought to various human rights bodies by Germans, Sudeten Germans, who couldn't get access to effective remedies in the Czech Republic. So, and there were even some decisions, for example, by the UN Human Rights Committee, where they found Czech Republic, at that time Czech Republic, to be in breach of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights for not providing an effective remedy for these individuals to reclaim their citizenship rights, for example. So I'm interested if you know, if you have been looking into these issues, how has the Czech Republic implemented those views of the Human Rights Committee? Because, you know, the Human Rights Committee adopts views, not judgments, but in practice they should have more or less the same effect, and the state should comply with those. So there were a couple of decisions. There were many decisions where the committee found these cases inadmissible, but there were some where the committee found a violation. So it would be interesting for me to know what happened afterwards.
Well, honestly, I have to be honest with you. I didn't really go into details with that. Sorry, I think I can't give you the answer.
Perhaps you can have a look at.
I will.
Yeah, would be interesting.
Maybe
to
on
read
March.
about. On March. Yeah.
Okay. I have a homework.
I only had a very brief statistical question on Ondrej concerning the levels of support for EU membership in Georgia and Moldova, because seeing the results of the elections last weeks, it didn't seem so. So I have no idea about the society there. But how do you interpret this? That as far as I remember, the support for the change of constitution in Moldova was barely 51%, and the elections in Georgia weren't very much pro-EU, as I would say.
But, from my perspective, the situation in Georgia is very dynamic. And it changed significantly from 2009 and the invasion to now. Because now Georgians see that support of European Union to Ukraine, especially military support and NATO countries' engagement is, let's say, very, very hesitant. And of course, Georgia is much more exposed to Russian influence. So many people are, let's say, turning back support for European Union, and there is increasing segment of society which is trying to stand in a position between Russia and EU. So not pro-Russian, not pro-European, but let's say specific national way. And this is also having impact on the elections. So far, I realized there are some acquisition that these elections were stolen because influence of disinformation, propaganda, some foreign money, and this electoral interference, which is requiring broader assessment. And situation in Moldova is very similar. Of course, the pro-European president was re-elected, but the electoral process was not very transparent and clean. And for the future of European Union and especially Eastern Europe, the issue of electoral interference, the issue of disinformation and propaganda will be very important for keeping these countries on a track to European Union.
Any other questions?
Just a short question to Dalibor. You presented the status of negotiations and accession process of several Western Balkan countries. And somehow I didn't catch it, maybe I missed it or maybe not. I would like to ask for your explanation about the status of Georgia. It was like crossed out on your chart. What is the current situation of Georgia's accession process?
Because they have applied for... oh, sorry. Yes. Okay, never mind. They have already applied, and there is an opinion of the Commission. But they... Okay. But they haven't get still the candidate status. That's why there is a cross on 2022. I think so.
Okay.
Maybe this was there was a mistake on this. How you call this slide? Yes, but they have already received. Maybe I haven't checked, to be completely honest with you, because it was not in the focus of my on my research. But still, you know, it makes us very anxious, all Western Balkan countries, because you know, this pace of integration of those three countries, the Eastern Trio, as they call it, is pretty much different from the situation in other Western Balkan countries.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Just technically, I now rechecked, and Georgia's status candidate status was confirmed by the European Council in December 23. 23,
okay. And probably this is from 2032, maybe the how you say, this table, this yes, okay. So even worse.
Thank you. Any other questions? Professor Szilágyi.
Now I cannot decide whether is it a question or a comment. At the end, you are going to make your conclusion. And my question or comment, it is to our colleagues from Czech and also from Germany. What is it? There were some assessments in connection with the political characteristic of given EU institutions. And maybe, first of all, in connection with the EU accession, and maybe there were a comment that Council of the European Union, this is a political institution. Okay. However, and maybe my interpretation is not correct, but somehow from your presentation, I received or I understood that according to your interpretation, the European Commission is not a political body. However, taking into account the presentation of our colleague from Czech Republic, I think you considered their actions in connection with this as political. Therefore, somehow I feel a kind of tension between these two positions. Is it a question?
I think it is. I think it is. You convinced me.
I might answer that quickly. So I refer to the council as a political institution because, of course, it's a representation of the member states, so it's highly political. But yeah, of course, the Commission is also political. I think speaking of the council, it's more obvious because it's the representation of the member states. And so what I wanted to refer to is that if we want to activate tools like Article 7 or the conditionality regulation, and the council is in charge of that, it's difficult to activate these tools because we are dependent among the member states. And if the council is the representation of the member states, it might be more hesitant to activate these tools because you don't ever know what comes in the future. So we're like more hesitant in this regard, and that's why I refer to the political component. But yeah, I would agree with you that the Commission is also a political institution. Yes.
There is a lot of analysis about the nature of European Commission, and I personally stick with the idea of politico-administrative hybridity. That of course you have this bureaucracy, but at the top level, European Commission is increasingly political, and I will tell you why. Of course, European commissioners and President of European Commission, they are not free of values. They have some values, and if you look at commissioners, they are usually people who were active in politics. So you have their socialists, conservatives, liberal, and so on, and this is having influence on attitude of European Commission. And of course, even if you have some measures of very technical nature, there is always some political impact of these measures, because these technical norms are influencing actors, and these actors are having political preferences or demands are linked to political parties and other actors. So it's, I think, impossible to separate like politics and technical administration, let's say.
I have a question for anyone, basically, not just the speakers, but the audience as well. And this arises out of the title of my presentation, you know. I'm speaking of concentric circles. So instead of having the European Union where we are really all equal and all bound by the same European Union acquis, we are now having, and that's a fact, a European Union of different obligations and different responsibilities and also different benefits consequently. So is, in your view, this the future we want? Or do you think there should be more efforts invested in trying to really unify the applicability of the European Union legal order across the entire membership, even if that means that perhaps enlargement will have to wait for a while? Or do we need to compromise because we want to enlarge even if we get different kinds of membership within the European Union? So that's a question, I think a general question that concerns all of us who are from the European Union member states, and I would really like to hear some opinions on that.
First of all, I have to assess the question. It is a really good question. And finally, I think that to find the correct answer, it is to find a correct or a proper starting point. And I think is what is the interest of the EU citizens or people of the European Union. Therefore, I think it's really important to find the interest itself and which kind of solutions serve in a better way to fulfill the interest of citizens. Now, I cannot give a detailed answer, but I think that this starting point, I think it's really important. And maybe after that, another thing, taking into account your question was really inspiring, that one of our presenter referred to the situation that the European Union is a dwarf, especially in international affairs. However, in my eyes, the enlargement policy is a really good instrument, or could be, or should be, it's also a question, in the hands of the European Union, because I think it can be served as a really, really effective tool to achieve high-level goals at international level.
If I may briefly reply, yes, with enlargement, European Union is getting more important actor and stronger, but at the same time, enlargement is increasing fragmentation inside. And that's why many Eurosceptics are in favor of enlargement, because increased diversity will prevent consensus, and that's why European integration, its deepening will be more difficult. So you don't know whether actors are supporting enlargement because they are Euro-optimist and positive, or they are Eurosceptic and they would like to prevent future development.
It is not a coincidence why at the beginning of my answer I started with this starting point. I think it's really important to think what interest is served via the EU. And after that, I think we can also decide about the question whether the enlargement is important or not important. I think it's not a theoretical thing, but the enlargement also should serve the interest of people of the European Union.
Just one more dimension in this discussion, I think, is, of course, now it's still very uncertain what will be happening after the elections in the US, but the first plans of the new elected President Donald Trump suggest that possible solution could be, freezing the Ukraine's ambitions of joining NATO, and it doesn't mention the EU, at least not in these first released plans. But given that the European Union is also, it seems, deepening its defense capabilities, it's an interesting question, whether there will be, if there is any future solution brokered by the US in place between Ukraine and Russia, which has this dimension, how would that impact Ukrainian accession process as well? So I think there are many interesting issues on what will be these exceptions, adaptations, transitional periods that will in fact be put in place in this case.